in looking at the videos that things weren't exactly what they said it was, and that being the administration. So for us, I think there is a breaking point. I never really thought I would see this quickly, about a year into it, Kate. But I think we are there. And I think what's sad, what's disgusting about it is because of polling. It's not because of what's happening with ICE and the fact that they're poorly trained. And we can believe our eyes on what we're seeing. And I think what you're seeing right now really is a breaking point.
Donald Trump and the Minnesota Governor Tim Walz have held a productive call as the US president faces pressure to carry out a full inquiry into Alex Pretty's shooting. Pretty was shot dead on Saturday during an altercation with Border Patrol in Minneapolis. He was 37 years old and a US citizen. The White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt held a press conference just before we came on air.
Nobody in the White House, including President Trump, wants to see people getting hurt or killed in America's streets. This includes Renee Good, Alex Pretty, the brave men and women of federal law enforcement, and the many Americans who have been victimized at the hands of illegal alien criminals.
Well, Leavitt blamed the death of Alex Pretty on Democrat leaders.
This tragedy occurred as a result of a deliberate and hostile resistance by Democrat leaders in Minnesota. For weeks, Governor Walz and the Mayor Jacob Frey and other elected Democrats were spreading lies about federal law enforcement officers who are risking their lives daily to remove the worst criminal illegal aliens from our streets: murderers, rapists, pedophiles, human traffickers, and gang members.
Well, earlier today, Donald Trump announced he was sending his border czar, Tom Homan, to Minnesota. Let's welcome Denver Riggleman, a former Republican congressman for Virginia and a former intelligence officer in the US Air Force. Good evening to you, Mr. Riggleman. Thank you very much for being with us. Look, it is the topic.
Hi, Kate, it's great to be here.
Thank you for being with us. It's the topic of much conversation here. Whether we've reached breaking point, a moment of reckoning for the Trump administration's ICE operations in the United States, particularly in Minnesota, bearing in mind the death at the weekend of a US citizen, Alex Pretty.
After watching the death of Renee Good and then Alex Pretty, it's very hard not to see that incompetence can be terminal. And I think you see the same things, Kate, with hyperbole, propaganda, and incompetence seems to be the things that happen within this administration. But I think with Alex Pretty, Renee Good was bad enough, but Alex Pretty was a Veterans Administration nurse. And a lot of us who are veterans, we knew pretty quickly that he was a nurse. And we also knew that in looking at the videos that things weren't exactly what they said it was, and that being the administration. So for us, I think there is a breaking point. I never really thought I would see this quickly, about a year into it, Kate. But I think we are there. And I think what's sad, what's disgusting about it is because of polling. It's not because of what's happening with ICE and the fact that they're poorly trained. And we can believe our eyes on what we're seeing. And I think what you're seeing right now really is a breaking point.
When you say breaking point, what might be the outcome?
I think the outcome, actually, if Tim Walz and Donald Trump are actually having conversations that are productive, which is pretty good to hear, because I'm in Greenland right now, so I haven't been there to see that. But I think the issue that you have is that ICE, they have to withdraw ICE, or they're going to have to go to some kind of remedial training. They're going to have to pull them out because this isn't working. And I think what you're seeing is the polling. If you go district to district, even Republican districts and Republican senators and congressmen are in the House of Representatives are saying this is enough. My guess is after the stuff that we've heard today happening between the Republican senators and Donald Trump, I think you're going to see ICE. I do believe you might see ICE actually withdrawn from Minnesota within the next week or two, or a diminished force. And I think that's what we're seeing is actually a complete turning of the public opinion against Donald Trump right now.
Yeah, look, I wonder how the arrival of Tom Homan will affect operations in Minnesota. He's a pretty hardline official, isn't he? I wonder whether that was the wrong move by Donald Trump.
It's always the wrong move by Donald Trump. The issue that you have, though, at this point is that when you have U.S. citizens gunned down, and when you see a propagandist like Caroline Leavitt can barely hold on, right? The lies just keep coming and coming. Again, Americans can see things with their own eyes, too. And there has to be a breaking point where the incompetence of this administration, the propaganda of this administration has to be seen for what it is. And, and again, Kate, it's so incredible. I was a former Republican congressman, and seeing what's happened to our party and their inability to go after a man who seems incapable of telling the truth, that being Donald Trump, and sending somebody like Tom Homan really has no business being there. I think you're finally saying you even have Republicans that are going against Trump. And when you see that, that's when you start to see that breakage.
Well, you are one of those Republicans, and you sound thoroughly fed up with the image that your party is portraying. thanks to the man who, to be fair, was democratically elected as US president.
He was 77 million votes. And I think that's the thing that, for me, Kate, and not to get incredibly personal here, on this live hit, but I think what we're seeing right now is this downflow of disinformation that people sort of ate up. And I think when you're looking at MAGA specifically, which doesn't seem to have any, I would say, similarity to the Republican Party of even 10 years ago before Trump, I think it's absolutely appalling to a lot of Americans that, it's the voters' fault. But on the other hand, when you start seeing this type of incompetence and this stupidity, even those that sort of bought into this, I think you're starting to see that Donald Trump was completely the wrong man for America. Not only the wrong man for America, but the wrong man for the world. And it's very difficult for somebody who's been behind closed doors with Donald Trump like I have, his lack of nuance and his inability to understand specific concepts about foreign policy. I think we need to have adults in the room. And right now, we just have children running around lying and spewing propaganda in a way, I think, that bothers anybody on the spectrum of the sane.
Can you recount any of those experiences to us, Denver, if you're to illustrate those claims that you make about Donald Trump, unable to grasp simple foreign policy?
Absolutely. I would love to give an example. When you're talking about Greenland specifically, and we're here now, and as just calling Greenland a block of ice, or not realizing the importance of Greenland as a people, or the fact that he, wants to enact tariffs against NATO because they're not somehow in support of him taking, a free land, where self-determination really is important. I think when you have somebody that's that ignorant about NATO alliances, but also about the history of the United States, but the history of Europe and the history of Greenland, I think when you have somebody like that in office, I think it's a danger to everyone because his decisions are made either on narcissism or some kind of emotive, issue that he has in his head at the time. And again, I think that's why the downstream effects of what you're seeing right now in the United States is just maybe with a 34% polling or in the low 30s for favorability rating, maybe finally you're seeing Americans wake up and say, this is not the guy, not only for our country, but for the world. And, yeah, it's hard not to be enraged, when you're seeing what's happening either with ICE in Minneapolis, what you're seeing with foreign policy, what you're seeing around the globe. It's hard not to be angry and to stay professional in all things that you do. But just here, just being in Greenland, the foreign policy mistakes that he's making and the downstream effects of what he's doing is so brutal to the experience of our alliances that I think there has to be a change sooner rather than later. And my hope is that the midterms in 2026 actually bring in that change.
Yeah, I mean, you are feeling the full effects of Donald Trump's rhetoric on Greenland and how that is concerning the locals, how that is concerning for NATO and beyond. So I was going to ask you about the mechanism, if you believe, and it sounds like you're saying that someone or something needs to remove Donald Trump as leader of the Republicans, as US president. How's that?
I think
how is that going to happen?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I think continuing down line, when you're hearing Republican senators talking about impeaching Donald Trump, when you're starting to hear that type of rhetoric, specifically on the tariffs and the threats that he had against NATO partners, when you're looking at what's happening with ICE in Minneapolis, when you're looking at the economy in the United States specifically, once you start seeing those type of threats, and when he's doing things like this, unilateral movement without Congress, which, let's be honest, Kate, Congress actually is, I would say abdicated much of their authority, under their Article 1 responsibilities, which I'm very well aware of. I think when you're seeing that, I think impeachment becomes something that might be possible. Now, I'm not saying it's going to happen. We don't need a ripple effect that impeachment's going to happen based on Denver Riggleman, a former Republican congressman. But I think what you're saying in midterms is going to be a huge message, one way or the other, Kate. And if the Democrats do take 35 to 45 seats, I think you're going to see some changes. And if it just so happens, this outside shot that the Democrats take the Senate, I think Donald Trump is effectively over. But I do think you might see more crazy actions from Donald Trump if that were to happen in the midterms. And at that point, there has to be a decision by Congress and those around him if he's fit to be president. And I know it's hard to even talk about this, but seeing what he's doing right now, what he's saying in public airways, what he's putting on Truth Social, trying to do policy through tweets, I think we're to that point in America that we have to see him for what he is and the people around him, which are sometimes just as complicit.
Were you a fan of Donald Trump going into this election? Is it just his actions in the last 12 months which have completely turned you off him?
Oh no, ma'am. I was sort of ejected from the Republican Party some time ago.
Because of
obviously didn't vote for him now. Yeah, and well, I was the senior technical advisor on the January 6th committee, Kate, as you probably know. When Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger asked me to do that, it was really back in 2019, 2020, when I said this man is not fit to be president. And that was a downstream effect of what happened to me, where I had to leave the Republican Party. It really did leave me. There was no way to stay in a party that would actually support somebody who was found liable of sexual abuse, a felon, and somebody whose companies have been, liable for fraud. And to me, there should be some direct lines. If you're somebody who votes and you have some moral compass, some sanity, where you don't vote for anybody like that. So no, I haven't been a supporter of Donald Trump at all.
All right. Well, look, let me just quiz you on China, if I might, because I noted that you served as a member of the House China Task Force. And so here we have a brain.
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Who is thoroughly researched on China and the operations of the CCP. Our Prime Minister Keir Starmer heads to China tomorrow. We might suggest, partly because he's been forced to look in that direction by Donald Trump and his onslaught on tariffs. He's going to have a one-to-one, Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, with the Chinese Premier Xi Jinping. There are going to be significant movements to build bridges with Beijing for business interest to help our economy. Is that a good idea?
I think now's the time to actually visit with China, and I'll tell you why. There's something I hope people in Europe look at, and that's this term called re-hemisphering. It comes from what the Republican Party is doing right now, if you're looking in South America. But if you're also looking what's going on with re-hemisphering, it's really this point in American foreign policy that sort of is a downstream effect from something called Project 2025, reach superpowers that actually control their own hemisphere. And that's a scary thing if you think about it, right? And, if you're looking at China and the South China Sea, you're looking at Taiwan. I mean, we did so many scenarios, Kate, on what could happen in the South China Sea, especially with projection of power. If you look at Russia and Ukraine right now and the fact that we've pretty much withdrawn our support from Ukraine, which is also just a tragedy, I think you're looking at some new type of, I would say, foreign policy direction where I think Europe, UK specifically, really needs to take the mantle on this and say, listen, we need to know what's going on here. And what is the U.S. policy? How does that affecting downstream when you're talking about China, when you're talking about Russia, and you're talking about the great powers? So right now is the time to engage, I think, at every level.
Okay, well, look, it's been great to speak to you. Thank you for your honesty with us. Denver Riggleman, former Republican congressman for Virginia, former intelligence officer in the U.S. Air Force, currently in Greenland, as you were hearing. Thank you for being with us.